John, you've been talking a lot about voter fraud. You've written a book about this. The mainstream media, the liberal media, contends that the Republicans, the conservatives, are trying to make this into nothing but voter suppression and a poll tax. I mean, what's the genesis of that? What's going on?
Well, there's some facts that we hope everyone agrees on. We have the sloppiest election systems of any industrialized democracy. It's not me saying that. The Pew Research Center, which has surveyed all of the 50 states, found that 1 out of 8 voter registrations in this country are either invalid or contain major errors. That's a disgrace. For example, we have 2 million dead people on the voter rolls. 2 million. Look, I believe we should honor the dead. I do not believe we should have representation without respiration. So I think we can do a much better job cleaning up our voter registration rolls, because right now they're an engraved invitation for voter fraud and bureaucratic bungling. You know, the Florida presidential race in 2000 was a whole series of missteps, and it ended up with 47 days we didn't know who the president was. Lawyers and courts got involved. I don't want to go through that. There are steps we can take between now and the November election to reduce the chances we have another Florida-style meltdown and recounts like we had in 2000 in state after state, not just one state.
The liberals seem to argue, though, that there's been very little evidence of vote fraud or voter fraud going on. How do you counter that?
Well, it's every day. In Iowa, just this week, 3 people arrested, sent to jail, non-citizens voting illegally. The week before that, Maryland congressional candidate, the Democratic nominee, had to resign because she had voted in 2 states in several elections. The week before that, the night Bill Clinton mounted the podium at the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte and proclaimed that these voter integrity laws weren't necessary. That very afternoon, back in Arkansas, where he used to be governor, a Democratic state legislator, a Democratic city councilman, and a police official all pled guilty to voter fraud. And by the way, they stole the election. It was decided by only 8 votes. So those are just anecdotal examples. But you go forward, we've had the Minnesota Senate race with Al Franken in 2008 decided by 312 votes. That seat was fought over for 8 months in court. That changed history. When Al Franken was seated in 2009, he became the 60th Democratic vote for Obamacare. That broke the filibuster against Obamacare. We wound up with Obamacare only because of Al Franken. It would have been a substantially different bill if he hadn't been there. And we learned after he was sworn in that 1,100 felons voted illegally in that election. You can't prosecute anyone for voting illegally in Minnesota if they simply say they made a mistake. You have to prove intent. So there were some felons who were stupid enough to say, well, yeah, I knew it was wrong, I knew it was illegal, I did it anyway. What's it to you, copper? So they have been prosecuted. We have almost 200 people who have been convicted of voting illegally in that Al Franken election. We have 66 more in the pipeline. We have dozens more being investigated. We may end up with more people convicted of voting illegally in that election than the margin of victory, which is 312 votes.
Now, is it true in your opinion, though, that instead of actually suppressing the vote, that in states that have had voter ID laws, that it's actually increased the vote?
Well, what the states are doing is 3 things at the same time. Voter ID laws, because voter ID laws not only prevent voter impersonation, they can prevent people from voting twice. They can prevent people from voting if they're non-citizens. They can prevent people from voting from different addresses that are fake. So there's a whole range of voter fraud those address. Then there's absentee ballot reform. Absentee ballots are the place where it's the tool of choice for voter fraudsters. We can force people to at least include the last 5 digits of their social security number or their driver's license. That can cut down absentee ballot fraud. And then there's cleaning up the voter registration rolls, which, as I mentioned, are a disgrace. Now, we've had very tough ID laws in place in Indiana and Georgia now for 7 or 8 years. Voter turnout has gone up. In Georgia, it went up dramatically among minorities. In Indiana, the same thing. And not just in 2008 when Barack Obama was on the ballot. That was an historic event. But in 2010, when we had midterm elections and he wasn't on the ballot. And that's the case in other states as well. Almost everyone has an ID. Almost everyone is happy to show it. Voter ID has 75% support in the latest Washington Post poll that's ratified by other polls. This is not controversial. And as for discriminating against minorities, there's no evidence of that. There's no one who's been brought forward and proven that there's been discrimination. And 65% of African Americans and 64% of Hispanics support photo ID at the polls.